I'm going to go back to gallery view so I can see you all. I'd rather see all of you than my big face. Great. So yeah, welcome to everyone. I think there's a few people here I haven't met tonight, so that's really lovely to see you. Sam, I think I might have only seen you once before. Tom and David, I don't think we've met before. So yeah, very lovely to have you all here. So yeah, you'll probably be aware that with the 5 precepts, that there's just one speech precept, and that's truthful communication. So we've been looking for the last 3 weeks at the first 3 precepts, deeds of loving kindness, open-handed generosity, and last week, stillness, simplicity, and contentment. So those 3 precepts all apply to the actions of the body. And then we move on to actions of the speech. So that's the speech precept that we're on, which is with truthful communication, I purify my speech. So Kaimasiri, we're going to hear more about that particular speech precept from Kaimasiri next week. I'm just going to close some of my windows because I think my bandwidth isn't very good. Bear with me. Okay, let's see if that's better. But yeah, what I thought we could do is take this area of not only speech, but communication more widely. We could take that further and look to the 10 precepts that are taken on at ordination. So there are actually lots of references to these 10 precepts in the canon. Well, there's a few references to them in the Pali canon. Usually, if you Google the 10 precepts, you're more likely to get the 10 monastic precepts, which include things that are taken on with monastic ordination. So things like not eating at a certain time of day, not handling money, and things like that. But because we're not a monastic order in Triratna, there's a different set of 10 precepts that we have. If you're interested, there's a great book by Sangha called The 10 Pillars, and he really sort of quite beautifully and quite poetically sort of outlines these 10 precepts. So Sangha, who founded this movement, is really keen to go sort of right back to the Buddha and in a way the underlying spirit of the precepts rather than the rule or letter of them. So what he really encourages us to do is look at what are the mental states that we're trying to work with and how might these be expressed through our speech in particular ways. And I'm sure we'll all be aware, like speech, it can be quite a difficult area to sort of work with in our ethics. It's quite a strong area. So in the 10 precepts, there are more speech precepts than other precepts. So you have the 3 body precepts, 4 speech precepts, and then 3 mind precepts. So in a way, it's like, oh, why is that? Why are there more speech precepts? So speech, as I was saying, comes between body and between sort of mind and body in a way. So speech is an expression of our mental states. And it's a bit more difficult to control than bodily action because it's more subtle, I think. So yeah, what it is in a way, it's our thoughts being said out loud. And I think it's difficult to conceive that it could have such an impact on others, but our speech really does have a big impact on others, doesn't it? Like, I'm sure we all know that what we say and the way that we say it really affects other people. So as well as speech and communication in Buddhism, moments of silence are really important as well. And for those of you who have been on retreats, yeah, it's something very enjoyable. At first, it can be quite nerve-wracking the first time you go into silence or know that you're going to have silence overnight or a period of silence. We're so used to talking all the time, aren't we? And I think sometimes people think they're going to feel uncomfortable around others. But my experience, and from what I've heard with others as well, is that actually it's sort of a relief when we don't have to think about our communication and what we're saying to each other, and we can just be with each other. And we do still communicate without speech when we're around each other in that way. And actually, it's just quite a beautiful way of being around each other without those words having to get in the way. And I think the reason that silence can help is that it helps us just sort of notice what's happening in our mind a bit more. So it helps us notice those mental states. And also it can help us reflect on what's really important and relevant for us to actually speak. So those moments of silence can just really help us work out what is it that we really need or want to say. So yeah, speech is really constant during our lives, and it's probably likely that we're going to break the speech precepts quite often. So just to sort of name that, really, that it's an area that we're probably going to have to work with quite a lot, really, if we're wanting to follow the ethical precepts. And as I was saying earlier, communication isn't just about speech. So the 10 precepts, we say with truthful communication, I purify my speech. So the precept is a speech precept, but actually it's wider than that. It's about our communication more generally. And that just got me thinking really about communication and what are the other ways that we communicate. And I'm sure you'll all have come across this, but there's this sort of this study that was done around how we communicate and what's actually communicated when we're with each other. So I'm just going to share my screen. So there was just one particular study, and actually it was only looking at communication within quite a particular area. Well, it was a couple of studies that were done, and it looked at content, tone, and body language. And it looked at like what percentages of those are sort of used during our communication. And I was just quite surprised the first time I came across this. I came across this when I did a Karana door knocking appeal, which is a sort of Buddhist fundraising appeal that we do where we live together, a bit like a retreat for 6 weeks, but we're going out and raising money in the evenings. And understandably, there's a lot of communication that has to happen during that process when you're fundraising, especially trying to do that in a Buddhist context. So we were having a look at this then, and I was quite shocked to see that apparently only 7% of what is communicated is through the content of what we say. 38% is the tone, and 55% body language. So I think that's it's just really interesting and amazing, like that we're not only communicating by the words that we say. And I guess the reason I wanted to share that is just that I think, the speech precepts aren't just about what we say, they are about just how we communicate more broadly. So that's about how we listen to each other, how we are in our bodies, what our facial expressions are doing. There's many, many ways that we communicate with each other that we can take into account. But despite this, what we say has a big impact. I think we can all probably recognize that. I was thinking about if we were together in the center tonight, then probably what we would have done is these communication exercises. So probably quite a few of you have done communication exercises before where you sort of sit a meter or so apart from each other. And you're sort of saying these phrases which don't really mean anything, like the cow is in the field, the sky is blue, and the person's just answering with yes. And what those exercises communicate is that our communication is very little about the content, and there's a quality with which we can be with each other, which enables a depth of communication. So I'm sad that we can't do those, but hopefully we'll sort of evoke the spirit of those exercises in a slightly different way. But as I was saying, words do have the power to unite or to cause harm. And sometimes they just sort of slip out, don't they, words, and just communicate what our mental states are. And it's really hard to sort of have control over that. And yet it can have a real impact on other people. communication is a really important area for me personally. So Bodhi and I have sort of hinted at this a little bit. So I really enjoy communication, and I particularly enjoy the area of communication as a working ground or a training ground. So using the precepts as training principles. So that's sort of partly what my name means. So the Kusala bit of my name means skillfulness, but part of that is around ethics as training. So it's not just something that either we have or we don't. It's actually that all of us can train in skillfulness. And I really love that. Like when I was given my name, my preceptor said that it's Kusala in this training in the sense of one might train as a cook or a musician. So just like developing those skills. And I really love that idea of developing more and more skill in communication. And actually in my communication becoming more and more beautiful in the world. And I love this quote in the foreword to that book that I mentioned earlier, The 10 Pillars. There's a quote from Vajrasakhi, which I found very beautiful. So she's talking about all of the precepts, not just the speech precepts. But she says, only I can be aware of the intentions behind my actions and speech. I have to be aware of these motivations and integrate them around my ideals. And I just love that. For me, that's what this training is about. It's about me taking personal responsibility that only I can know what my intentions are. And it's up to me if I want them to be in line with the values that are important to me. And at the same time, I'm aware with the precepts, it's like we're not just trying to like do good. We're not trying to be do-gooders in a way. So we're trying to notice what our intention is and how that might affect our actions, our speech, and our mental states. But also it can act the other way around, where if we act more in line with how an enlightened being might act, which is the precepts at their most perfect, then that in turn can have a positive influence on our intention and on our motivation. So it's almost like when you act as if, you sort of, that influences how, what your intention might be and what becomes important to you. So it's this kind of two-way process, like noticing what our intention actually is. But also if we try out acting in a particular way, that also might influence our intention and our motivation. And I was thinking as well how important listening is. So not just what we say, but the way that our words land with other people and what impact our speech has. And again, we can listen not only to someone's words, but to their facial expression, their body language. And we can really just be really aware, like, how does it land? How does what I'm saying land with someone? And why might that be? If they look a bit surprised or they look a bit hurt or a bit shocked or a bit pleased, why is that? What is it about what we've said that has had that effect on them? And just sort of reflecting in this way, it might be that that happens during the communication itself, or it might be that we go away afterwards and sort of reflect, gosh, when I said that, they seem to have quite a strong response. I wonder why that was. And we can just learn more about ourselves and about the other person through doing that. Okay, so I'm going to just pop up the precepts. So these are the 4 precepts that are within those 10 precepts I was talking about, the 4 speech precepts. So with truthful communication, I purify my speech. And the negative form of that is I undertake to abstain from false speech. So as I said, Kama series is really going to focus on this particular precept next week. Then we've got with kindly communication, I purify my speech. And the other form of that is I undertake to abstain from harsh speech. With helpful communication, I purify my speech. And undertaking to abstain from useless speech. And with harmonious communication, I purify my speech. And undertaking to abstain from slanderous speech. So they're the 4 speech precepts that we'll just consider this evening, but particularly the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th ones of those. So I just thought we could do an exercise around those together. So I'm going to just give you some time to think about some communication, either some communication that you've had in the past with someone, or something that you need to say to someone that feels like it might be a little bit challenging, or there's a bit of heat there. So it might be some communication that you've had in the past which someone was hurt by and you're not too sure why, or it might be that they were hurt by and you know why. Or it might be that you just have this sense that there's something really important that you need to communicate to someone, or that it would be helpful to communicate to someone, and it feels a little bit challenging in some way. And just to say, it's not that we're going to be sharing that in a group, so just so that you feel safe to really just think about whatever's helpful for you to think about in this area, in this section. So I'll just give you a few minutes to think of something, some sort of communication that you need to have with someone. And it doesn't just need to be, you know, it can be something small or something big. Yeah. It's fine as well if you can't think of anything that's particularly challenging or particularly fueled, but it could just be a conversation that you know you need to have with someone, whether that feels challenging or not. So it could just be just a general conversation that you're going to have in the future. Okay, does anyone need more time? Maybe put your hand up or wave if you need more time. I'm just going to scroll through the pages, so if you're waving, keep waving. No? Okay, great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up some questions that I've got, which are around each of those areas, each of those precepts. And they're just to help us with this particular communication that we've either had in the past or might have in the future, just to reflect on a way that we might be able to sort of deliver that communication or have that communication that is in line with the precepts. And there's a lot of different questions, so it might be that we can't get through them all. So what I'm going to do is put up a slide of them so that if one or two particular questions stand out, you can just take this time to do some written reflection around that particular area. But what I will do is just go through them one by one. And if you do feel that you want to just sort of go through as I lead them, then you can just sort of scribble a few notes as we go along. But it's really up to you. Just like use these questions in a way that's helpful for you. And we'll do this exercise for about 10-15 minutes. There'll be enough time for you to sort of write and really have the opportunity to explore this communication. So hopefully you've all got pen and paper, but if not, you might want to go and grab something now. Oh, you're all very prepared. Up there with your paper and pen. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to share questions. Okay, can you see all of those? There's quite a few. Okay, so what we'll do, it's up to you. You can just not look at the screen if you like, and I'll just sort of start going through these questions and you can just be sort of jotting down what's helpful. But if it feels like that's at too fast a pace for you and there's a particular one question that you want to focus on, then just feel free to come back to these questions here and just choose that one and just write about that. So we'll start with truthful communication. And as I said, I'm not going to spend too long on this one actually, because Kamasiri is going to go into this in much more depth next week. But this particular communication that you want to have or you've had in the past, I'm just going to ask some questions about it. So how do you know that this this communication you're going to have is true? What makes you know that it's true? So is this thing that you're going to say something that's happened in your direct experience? Or is it secondhand? Have you heard about it through someone else? So this next one, I was just thinking about us taking responsibility for our own our own responses, our own experience, and in that way speaking without blame. In a way, if we are speaking with blame, it's probably not totally truthful, because if we're blaming someone, then we're often saying something like, oh, it's your fault. Whereas actually things are much more complex usually than it being someone's fault or our fault or what someone else has done. So in that way, I just think blame is quite an important one within truthful communication. So can we take responsibility for our own sort of responses, our own experience? And how might we do that? How might we communicate that? Is the thing that we're going to say, is it an assumption? Are there any assumptions at all in there about ourselves or about the other people, the other person? Or is there any exaggeration in there? How might we say this thing without exaggeration? Okay, so we'll move on to the next precept, which is kindly communication. As I said, at any time, if you feel you just want to stay with any of these questions, please do just use them in a way that's helpful for you. So the first point here is just to always prioritize kindness. So in a way, can we have a communication in a way where we're trying to really prioritize being kind to the person that we're talking to? And then I was just aware that what real kindness is something that helps someone else grow. So actually, it might be quite challenging. It might be something quite challenging that we're saying. But even so, we can deliver that in a kind way. So what's the kindest way for someone to hear what we need to say? Can we just take into account what we know about them and their conditioning and how something might land kindly with this other person? I also think if we can say something kindly, then it's much easier for someone else to hear. They're likely to be much more receptive. So what might help us to speak kindly to someone else? Okay, so then we move on to the next precept, which is helpful communication, also known as meaningful, which I find, I don't know, that just gives it a slightly different flavor. Meaningful. To me, that suggests something a bit different from helpful, but I think both are useful things to bear in mind. So with this communication that we have in mind, can we think about it from the other person's point of view? So how is it for them to receive this communication? And then considering what's our intention. So what's our intention in having this communication? Is it to make ourselves look good? Is it for our own benefit? Is it for the benefit of the other person? And just thinking about that, I've not got an example in my mind, but as I say that, I'm aware like our intentions and motivations are usually really mixed, aren't they? It's not like it's going to just be one particular intention that we have. So can we just be aware of the range of intentions or the range of motivations that might be behind what we want to say? So in terms of this thing being helpful, does this person really need to hear it? Will it actually help them? And then I really like this one. If a third party were there, someone who we really trusted or respected, would they agree that this communication is helpful for the other person? So if there was someone else present who you really trust or respect, would they agree that this communication is helpful? So moving on to the final speech precept, which is harmonious speech. So this thing we want to say, will it bring people together or will it divide them? And we could think not only in terms of us and the other person and whether it will bring us into deeper harmony, but if we say this thing, might it put the person that we're speaking to out of harmony with others who they know? So as well as just harmony between us and the other person, thinking about harmony more broadly for other people as well. And in that similar area, is it gossip? It probably also comes into helpful speech above as well. Okay, so that's the 4 speech precepts. So then we have the Abaya Suta. So the Buddha in the Abaya Suta speaks about the importance of communication also being timely. So in that sutta, he says that it's only helpful, it's only good to speak if what we're going to say is both truthful and beneficial. So the Buddha sort of says that's the bottom line really for whatever you're going to say. It must be truthful and it must be beneficial. Whether or not it's agreeable for that person to hear, so whether or not the person wants to hear isn't so relevant, but in that case, it always must be timely. So we must sort of say this thing at the right time. So how do we know when it's the right time to have communication? How do we know when it's the right time to speak to someone about something important? And some things we can consider in this are, is the person receptive? Are they receptive to what we have to say? And we can also consider our own mood, our own mental state, our own intention. And finally, when we're thinking about timely communication, do we have enough time to complete the conversation? So sometimes it can just be tempting to say something to someone when we only have a few minutes. And just can we consider, is there enough time to really have that full conversation? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen. So, yeah, don't feel like anyone has to say anything, but it might just be good to hear from one or two people. You don't have to. So, yeah, I guess just as I was saying earlier, communication is more than just the words that we use. So there's also something about a sort of mood and a responsiveness, or even an intention with which we enter communication with someone else. And I think sometimes the precepts can feel a bit sort of stiff or a bit structured, and they can sometimes feel even a bit restrictive, although that's not how they are in their true spirit, actually. But I think the other side is something around energy, so more creative, more spontaneous speech, but also our general approach to communication. So this is an area that I just really enjoy reflecting on. And that's sort of, how can I base my speech or my communication more and more in wisdom, in a way? So is it possible for me to enter communication with someone without polarizing? Is it possible to be really open and curious about what might happen and not to have a set outcome for that communication? Or if I do have an outcome, for the outcome to be a deeper understanding of the other person? And I don't know, I just find for myself, when I enter into communication in this way, I can be much freer then with my own energy, with my own speech. It's like I'm not sort of so narrow about, oh, this is the thing I need to say and this is what I need to tell this person. It's more like I'm entering into an exchange and I don't know what's going to happen. And that's quite exciting, actually, even though it can be nerve-wracking when we don't know what's going to happen. It's like, can we just sort of enter this space in a much more open way? So I'm just going to share my screen one more time. So these are some questions around this particular, just some points actually around this particular area. So yeah, can I enter communication without polarizing and just be open and curious? And for me, what helps me to do this is noticing what's happening in my body. And if I find places of tension in my body, breathing into them, softening, and just bringing kindness to myself. And this is something that I can do before that communication. So sometimes I have the sense before I speak to someone about something, I'm a bit sort of nervous or a bit tense. So I can just sit beforehand and just really notice what's happening in my body and bring some kindness to that. But also with practice, it's possible to do that while we're in communication. So it's possible to be aware of ourselves and our own kind of experience in the body while we're also aware of that other person in front of us. And it does take practice, but it is possible to sort of, in a way, we can even dance between them, being aware of the other person and then coming back to ourselves and just sort of, yeah, can we keep coming back? What's happening right now for me? And I was aware that sometimes we just have to trust and give people the benefit of the doubt. So if we're speaking to someone in the Sangha and we feel hurt by what they said, or even just like if we're speaking to our friends, it's probably not that they actually intend to hurt you. So we do sometimes feel hurt, don't we, by other people's words. And there might be times when we're sort of in communication with someone and they are intentionally trying to hurt us. But often with our friends, it's not that they really want to hurt us. So sometimes we just have to trust and give people the benefit of the doubt. But also what can be quite challenging is if they do hurt us, is it possible to let them know without hurting them back? That's quite a challenging one, I think. We can just sometimes feel like if we're hurt, we really want to sort of give that back to the other person or make them feel as bad as we do. So just somehow like, how can we just sort of let them know that we're hurt without sort of throwing that back at them in a way? Can we enter into the communication without expectations? I think if we do this, we can just be much less defended. And then the communication can have more depth. It's possible for us to learn from each other. When we have expectations, it's like the communication just isn't going to be as creative because we're, as I said before, it's like we're wanting to take it in a certain direction. We want to tell someone this particular thing. Can just be more open about it. That's when things can arise that were unexpected and much more creative. And that's where there's an opportunity for both of us to sort of learn within that communication. So can we really listen to the other person as well? And I love this phrase, like, can we listen to understand rather than listen to respond? I think so often we're listening and we're totally thinking about what we need to say in response to that person. And that's not true listening. You know, true listening is really trying to understand what someone's saying. And I think what that requires is, again, is for us to just drop our own expectations or our own preconceptions of how the conversation might be. Just let that go and just sort of see, can we just enter into understanding this person more deeply? I think this is an important one, actually, seeing the precepts as a practice and allowing ourselves to get things wrong. So expressing ourselves and just trusting what our intention is in a particular communication that we have, and just taking risks, knowing that we might get that wrong sometimes. And with that, what we're probably going to have to do is just be willing to see and learn the effect that our communication has on people. So it might be that totally unintentionally, something we say hurts someone else. And what we can do is, rather than being hard on ourselves, we can learn from that. So we can learn, was there something that we said, or was it the wrong time? What was it that upset that person, and can we learn from that? And within that, probably around the area of listening, the importance in communication of silence and pausing. So this can actually help us with that very first point of noticing what's happening in our body. If we can just pause in communication, we can just come back, notice what's happening in our body, notice if there's tension, notice if there's a particular response that we have. Or it might be that rather than being silent and pausing, we actually need to speak out more. So I think we just need to know ourselves, actually. We need to know what's our tendency. Do we tend to say a lot? Or do we tend to be someone that shies away and doesn't communicate enough? And only we can really know that. I mean, our friends can help us and can reflect that back, but only we can know if there's something burning inside of us that we're not saying. So it might be that we need to speak out more. And are we aware of how our words are landing? So again, this is just about that communication is two-way, and just noticing how's that landed, what's that person's facial expression, body language like, how has it actually landed what we've said? So I've just actually put the link for that, what do you call it? PowerPoint, that's the word. I've just put the link in the chat box, just so that you've got those questions and points. And if you wanted to refer back to them at all, I've just sort of shared that with you. So if any of those questions or reflections were helpful, then you can just sort of refer back to that. Yeah, so we've got 15 minutes left, and I think I'd just like to open up really and see what's come out of that, whether there's particular reflections that people have had or questions or areas that you might like to explore a bit more fully in this last sort of 10, 15 minutes. Thinking about this particular evening and just, just reflecting a bit more consciously. As I say, it's an area that I'm interested in, but I was just, I've enjoyed thinking about how to communicate that with you all as well. So do come along next week when Kay Masiri will take the idea of the speech precept of truthfulness more deeply. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Kay Masiri.
Not really. That's truthful, isn't it? I'm going to tell you some stories. So that's it's slightly different. Still be workshop style, but a bit different. Yeah.
Great. Lovely. Thanks, Kay Masiri. Okay, so I'm just going to pass back to Bodhi, who's just going to let us know about a few things that are happening at the centre in the next few weeks.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kusaladevi.